Hey everyone, welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be an interesting conversation. We're doing a late night one, right? Last night I had trouble going to sleep and I thought maybe I should have just started it a little bit later. So tonight I did start it later. We try to have a diversity of times when we do these streams. But anyway, should be a great conversation tonight. So hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and away we go.
Of the American century, I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you. Should be a great conversation. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell. It's going to be great. Just a few quick points to go over before we get started here. First things first, the Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. We are going to have a conference coming up in March. It's going to be a great conference. More details about that are surfacing every day. It's getting more and more exciting. So if you want to be a member of the activities that we do here, you want to be involved in our efforts, feel free to join the Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. We are always looking to expand our membership. We are at 63 dues-paying members and marching ahead. More people are joining. Actually, we're at 65. I forgot. 63 was from the weekend, but then 2 people joined. So we're at 65 dues-paying members. That's a great step forward. Another thing I did want to mention is that pretty soon we'll be having a patrons only stream. So if you want to be part of the Patreon community that supports the work that we do, why, you can always sign up. So go ahead and join the Patreon. Another quick announcement coming up. It will be on Sunday. Peter Coffin's new documentary about degrowth and eugenics and, the evils that the synthetic left is promoting, the kind of the sinister side of this wokeism and the economics behind it, the anti-communism. It's going to be released and it's great. It is a documentary that is awesome, full of great information. So we're going to be having a stream on this channel to promote it. That'll be at 5:30 Eastern time this coming Sunday. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. And so it would like to be here. If you'd like to see us kind of do the introduction to that documentary, it's going to be great. So those are a few quick announcements. Happy holidays to everyone who is celebrating one of the holidays of this time of year, right? We've got Christmas for Christians. We've got Hanukkah for Jews. We've got Kwanzaa for those of Black nationalist orientation. I'm trying to think if there's any other holidays this time of year. Muslims don't really have anything this time of year that I can think of. So there you go. So the way these streams work is that I give my opening remarks. And while I am giving my opening remarks, I am writing down your super chat questions. So if you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, now's the time to shoot me a super chat. I'll be writing the super chat questions down throughout my opening remarks. So send me a super chat about what you'd like to talk about in the second half of the show. I will write it down. When my opening remarks have concluded, I will then do the roll call, and we will find out who it is on the other side of the camera, and that'll be cool. And then after that, after we've done the opening remarks and after we've done the roll call, at that point, I start answering your super chat questions. So keep the super chats rolling in. I am ready to answer them. It's going to be great. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and I will jump right into my opening remarks. Folks, I am very, very proud to call Tara Reid a friend of mine. Tara Reid is the victim of Joe Biden. She was sexually assaulted by Joe Biden. She spoke at the Center for Political Innovation Conference in Texas, gave a very moving speech. We then gave her an award. And just recently, Tara Reid, she appeared with Tucker Carlson. It was plugged on the Tucker Carlson show, but it was like a special podcast episode, long chat she did with Tucker Carlson. So because it's so important for the world to hear what Tara Reid has to say, I thought I would just show the clip here. This is Tara Reid, friend of mine, friend of the Center for Political Innovation, talking about what happened and what Joe Biden did to her. Let's just watch.
When Biden started acting weird towards me, he would like put his hands on my shoulder and put his fingers underneath my hair and do weird things like that. And then there was a scene where...
What did you think of that? I mean, did you...
Well, bear in mind, and you were around and a professional in the 90s, it was a different... I don't know if you were in D.C., but it was a different vibe.
I was in D.C., yeah.
Okay, that was a different vibe, but it still was weird. I'd never had an employer do that, and Panetta certainly didn't act like that.
No, he's not like that.
No, not at all. And he's just all business. And, Joe Biden was always, he didn't seem like an intellectual giant, let's put it that way.
Right. No, he was famously not.
Yeah.
But a charismatic and warm guy. That was the conventional view.
And that's the thing. Behind closed doors, he was very temperamental.
Really?
And he would do this thing where he smiles when he's angry. It's very disconcerting. Very disconcerting, that big smile, and but he'd be angry, and he was very temperamental. He had me up against a wall, and he penetrated me with his fingers against my will. And I, it wasn't just the assault though. It was everything to do with, here I am, this young staffer, and he did this, and then I made him angry. And that's like someone you don't want to make angry. Because I said no.
I just think it's, I've got to be honest, one of the reasons I didn't know what to make of your story was I've been a man for, 53 years.
Yeah.
I've never heard of anything like that. Like that's, men are kind of piggish, as we know, and they do piggish things. But that's like kind of like rape. I mean, that's like so out of bounds that it's weird to think someone would do something like that.
It was just, it happened all at once. It happened really quickly. There was no like flirtation with him or anything like that. It was very, he was usually with people and he wasn't. I was like at the wrong place, the wrong time, so to speak. And when it happened, he at first was like, come on, man, I heard you liked me. And I froze. And then he said he got angry, and that's when he smiled, that smile. And that's what was really jarring. And then he pointed his finger in my face and he said, you're nothing. You're nothing to me. And then I must have had a certain look on my face, and he just took my shoulders and shook them. He said, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. And then he turned around and he walked away. And I remember it was just such a jarring, shocking incident. Probably was all of less than 5 minutes, right? But my vivid memory is sitting on these marble stairs, and my legs were shaking so badly because it wasn't just what he did. It's that I knew my career was over. That was it. Like I had said no, it was an awful thing, and this was the end. He used his power and resources to silence me. And I'm going to share something with your audience. They took a cannonball to my life.
Yeah.
They went after my family. So when that day, when he did that assault, he took my future. I didn't want to sleep with some senator. I wanted to be one. And that day, it ended.
So there you go. A very powerful conversation between Tucker Carlson and my friend Tara Reid. Wow. I'm so glad that she was able to say that on national television. I'm so glad that the world's been able to hear her. And she has been subjected to so much character assassination. I mean, they have gone out of their way to destroy her reputation, destroy her credibility. Me Too, was the rallying cry of the Democrats when Donald Trump was president. And all of a sudden, Joe Biden became their nominee, and they immediately shut up about all of this. I mean, and of course, Tara's not the only woman that Joe Biden has been inappropriate with and sexually harassed. And I mean, they have really done everything they can to try and destroy her reputation and destroy her family. And but yet she persists and she doesn't surrender. And we just have to just be absolutely in awe of the bravery of Tara Reid, and how she doesn't surrender, how she's an anti-imperialist at this point. And she's, spoken out in support of Russia and support of China and Venezuela and other countries that are under attack by U.S. imperialism. She is really, really an icon. So I just wanted to show that clip, and I just wanted everyone to see that because, they've done everything they can to keep the world from hearing what she has to say, because her story is very, very horrifying. And it also is very, very believable if you look at who Joe Biden is and if you look at everything. And, there's been so much of this Me Too movement that is, it's things that maybe are not okay, but are not what Joe Biden did to her. Louis C.K., for example, right? He would ask permission. Can I touch myself in front of women? That's creepy. But they would say yes, and then he would do that. He's in a position of power, you could argue, right? He's a famous comedian, right? But at the same time, I mean, that's not what Joe Biden did to her. I mean, Joe Biden sexually assaulted her. I mean, there was no asking, there was no consent at all. I mean, and there are many, many cases of this Me Too kind of situation where it's, you look at some of these situations where it's, there's some ambiguity. There's no ambiguity about what happened to Tara Reid. None. There is no ambiguity whatsoever. This is not an inappropriate joke in the workplace. This is not a handshake that took too long. This isn't, a back rub that was unwanted. This is what it is. I mean, you just heard what Tara said. I mean, there's no ambiguity there. And the same people that are adamant to destroy people's lives and careers and reputations over things that are much more questionable have done everything they can to prevent the world from hearing what Tara Reid had to say about what Joe Biden did to her. And it shows the utter hypocrisy. Cancel culture is weaponized. It is absolutely weaponized, and they will go after certain people and they will not go after other people. And if they want to get you, they will take the smallest thing and make a mountain out of a molehill and use it against you. And if you're somebody like Joe Biden, who they want to be president, they will make sure to just push it under the bridge, push it under the rug. And I mean, Tara Reid should have been on all national television during the 2020 elections. She should have been everywhere. And the Democrats made sure that we didn't get to hear her. And I'm glad that we got to hear her on national American TV now. And it just shows you how selective the cancel culture really is. And we might talk more about this kind of thing later. I don't want to get into too much down this path tonight because there's a lot of different things to say. We got a lot of different streams coming up. But I also wanted to draw your attention to a case that I actually didn't even know about this case until recently. This is in Sweden. this is going on. This was a package that just ran on Press TV about the case of Hamid Nuri. Do folks know about Hamid Nuri? Well, here, I'm going to show the story. I'll tell you all about Hamid Nuri. This is a wild, wild case.
Family members and a group of activists gathered in front of the Swedish embassy in Tehran to demand the release of former Iranian judiciary official Hamid Nuri, who has been sentenced to life imprisonment by a Swedish court. The protesters condemned the politicized verdict issued against Hamid Nuri, who has been kept in solitary confinement for over 3 years.
On the one hand, by issuing a verdict against Hamid Nuri, the former Iranian official, based on accusations leveled by MKO terrorist group, Sweden has actually recognized the terrorist group and has allowed its members to live freely on its soil. On the other hand, during the legal procedure, Hamid Nuri has been deprived of his legal rights to defend himself properly in the court because he could not have access to an independent lawyer. He had no contact with his family for 8 months, and he has been under white torture.
So basically, and we'll resume watching the piece, but this is what happened. Hamid Nuri, he is a judge. He was a judge in Iran, part of the Iranian government, part of the Islamic Republic. He's a judge. And he was a judge. And as a judge in Iran, he had to deal with the Mujahideen Khalq terrorist organization. Mujahideen Khalq terrorist organization. It's a religious organization. They believe that their founder, Masoud Rajavi, is the combined reincarnation of the Prophet Muhammad and Jesus and Lenin all in one body, sent to Earth to usher in some kind of global Islamic revolution. And they're a terrorist organization. And they've bombed and killed and attacked all kinds of people. They killed a number of Americans before the Islamic Revolution of Iran. And in 1981, they bombed the Iranian parliament, killed 81 members of the Iranian parliament. This is a very extreme terrorist group, and they used to be on the U.S. government's list of designated terrorist organizations. They worked for Saddam Hussein during the Iraq-Iran war. It was a horrendous terrorist organization. So this guy, Hamid Nuri, he was a judge in Iran. He was doing his job as part of the internationally recognized government of Iran. And he sentenced members of this terrorist organization that bombs and kills and tortures people. He sentenced them to death, or he sentenced them to being arrested under Iranian law, inconsistent with the Iranian constitution. So, he was just doing his job as a judge, as a member of the Islamic Republic, against what everyone recognizes to be a vile terrorist organization. So now, in 2019, authorities in Sweden arrested him. And members of this terrorist organization, Mujahideen Khalq, members of the MEK, said, oh, he's responsible for members of our group being tortured. He's responsible for members of our group being executed. And so he's been sentenced to life in prison in Sweden. Could you imagine this? This would be like an American judge, goes on vacation to China, and China looks over some of his rulings and says, we don't like your rulings. And then they grab that judge and send him to life in prison in China. It's ridiculous. It's a huge violation of Iran's sovereignty. And it's being done in defense of a terrorist organization. Mujahideen Khalq, MEK, is a terrorist group that kills people, that worked for Saddam Hussein, that tortures people, that cuts people's heads off, that bombs buildings. And this Iranian citizen who was a judge, did his job as a judge and proceeded over criminal activities against them. And they arrested him in Sweden and charged him with, violating human rights or something. And now he's been sentenced to life in prison in Sweden for doing his job as part of the internationally recognized Iranian government.
Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian called on the new Swedish government to immediately release Hamid Nuri, saying the politicized case of Nuri and efforts by the Mujahideen Khalq organization MKO terrorist group to disrupt a legal probe into the case have seriously harmed relations between Tehran and Stockholm.
We demand that justice be done with regard to my father, because according to many lawyers, the Swedish court verdict against my father was totally politicized and has no legal ground, and there is no concrete evidence for providing the accusations against my father.
Yeah, there's no legal ground, usury. There's no legal ground. There's no legal ground for arresting a guy in Sweden for doing his job as a judge under the internationally recognized government of Iran. And then having terrorists be the main people that testify against them, what was recognized until 2013 when Hillary Clinton delisted them. Mujahideen Khalq was internationally recognized for being a vile terrorist organization. They conducted assassinations in Iran in coordination with Israel. So, this is ridiculous.
Therefore, we condemn the court ruling and demand his immediate release.
Swedish authorities allege that Hamid Nuri was involved in the execution and torture of the MKO members in 1988. He has strongly rejected the allegations. According to Iranian officials, keeping an individual in solitary confinement for 3 years is tantamount to torture, which runs against EU Convention on Human Rights. Saman Kujuri, Press TV, Tehran.
Oh, and thanks for the super chats. I'm writing them down. But that case, Hamid Nuri, he's just an Iranian judge who's been grabbed by authorities of another country that didn't approve of his rulings and are sympathizing with this terrorist group, Mujahideen Khalq. And based on that, he's been sentenced to life in prison in another country. This is absolutely ridiculous. And this is the game that they're playing right now. This is something that the U.S. imperialists have figured out they can do. They can grab people, right? They grabbed Maria Butina. They grabbed Victor Bout. They grabbed people. This is what they did. They grabbed the daughter, the CFO of Huawei Technologies, detained her in Canada for a long time. This is the game that they're playing. The U.S. government has become the international kidnapping agency, right? They've turned into the mafia. They kidnap people in order to extract things out of countries. If they don't like a country, they want to get something out of a country, they grab a leader of that country, their daughter or their cousin or their relative, and they grab them on some bullshit charges and hold them. It's really unbelievable what the U.S. imperialists are doing. It's criminal how they are acting. And this is yet another case of that. Hamid Nuri. So I wanted to bring that to folks' attention as well. I wanted to make people aware of that because this is yet another case of kidnapping. Hamid Nuri needs to be freed. He needs to be returned back to Iran. If people don't approve of court decisions he made in 1988 when he was a judge in Iran, that's for Iran to deal with. That's not for Sweden to deal with. Julian Assange, exactly. It's exactly what they're doing to Julian Assange, right? And Julian Assange needs to be freed as well. It's really, really outrageous the way U.S. imperialism thinks it has a license to just go around the world kidnapping people it doesn't like, whether it's Julian Assange, Alex Saab, the Venezuelan diplomat who was grabbed, and is being detained here in the United States. They feel like they have the right to just kidnap people. And this is how they're operating. When they don't like a country, they don't like a government, they just kidnap people. It's really, really unbelievable. It's really, really unbelievable. And they use trumped up corruption charges, the Panama Papers. That's what they went after. They just, removed the president of Peru. They just removed him, They just removed the president of Peru in a coup. They've gone after Cristina Kirchner to prevent her from being the leader of Argentina. They've gone after Isabel dos Santos. The leader of Angola, the person who's largely responsible for raising so many people out of poverty in Angola. She's now in hiding at this point. Interpol is out to get her. This is ridiculous what they are doing. And that's why the Center for Political Innovation needs to exist. We need to be here to show people the other side of the story because all the people they're targeting are city builders. That's who they're targeting. They are targeting the city builders, right? These are all people, Isabel dos Santos, she built Luana. the capital of Angola. Under her leadership, Luanda, the capital of Angola, became a prosperous city. She used the state-run oil company to build up the economy of Angola. She's a city builder, right? There's a quote from the Wall Street Journal where they talk about, what Maduro has done in Caracas. And, it's this right-wing reporter. He says, back in 2014, the party was still on. The skyline of Caracas was dotted with ambitious construction projects, right? He was a city builder. I mean, and I've seen the housing, the construction that they've done. They targeted them. They've targeted the government, the government of Venezuela, right? And Victor Bout, he ran a company. He ran a cargo company, and they created this whole campaign that he was somehow, responsible for for what was he responsible for? They made him responsible for being the merchant of death. And because of that, they built this whole campaign up against him, and he was forced into the United States. They held him. He finally just got to go home. They're targeting people that are part of the new economy that is emerging around the world, the alternative economy, this economy that isn't part of Western capitalism, that is centered around revolutionary and anti-imperialist governments around the world, that believes in economic growth. I mean, because that's what they believe in China. They believe in growth. They believe in raising people up out of poverty, and they believe getting beyond the chaos of the market, getting beyond the anarchy of production. They have a centrally planned economy. And that is who the U.S. government is targeting. They are targeting various people. Alex Saab, who was working with both Iran and Venezuela to build up the economy. Now this Iranian judge, Hamid Nuri. This is the game that they are playing. And we have to be the ones to stand against this stuff and say, no, we are opposed. We are opposed. And in fact, speaking of that, since we're talking about city builders, I might show you another clip here, right? Tonight, I'm just showing you a lot of clips, right? Some nights I give a prepared speech. Other nights, I just talk. This is, they built a bunch of new houses in North Korea. There's been a new housing development in North Korea, modern housing being provided to farmers in a rural part of North Korea. I just thought you might all want to see this video. Again, they don't show us, the truth about North Korea.
New houses have been built at the Ryonghung Farm in Taecheon County of North Pyongan Province.
Look at these houses. They're pretty nice.
A meeting was held on the 4th.
Look at that. Look at that.
Present there were Chu Chol-nam, Secretary of the North Pyongan Provincial Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea, Ri Yong-chol, Chairman of the Provincial People's Committee, officials in Taecheon County, builders and agricultural workers of the Ryonghung Farm. Ri Yong-chol made a congratulatory speech. Permits for use of dwellings were awarded at the meeting. Officials congratulated the owners of new houses.
These are agricultural workers in North Korea. They built this beautiful new housing development, and they had a ceremony, and then they gave the housing to these agricultural workers. This is a farm. It's in a rural, desolate place there in North Korea. North Korea is very mountainous. And they built these modern housing buildings, and then they had this beautiful ceremony. They got Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung there, and then they awarded all these agricultural workers, all these farmers, basically. They got access to these new housing, right? Look at that. That's nice housing. You go to American neighborhoods, right? Go to the suburbs of Chicago, go to the suburbs of Detroit, go to the suburbs of Cleveland. And you'll see empty, boarded up, foreclosed homes. You'll see homes with the windows boarded up and they're falling apart. But at the same time, in North Korea, there's centrally planned economy, even though they're cut off from the world and all of that. Look, all these agricultural workers just got access to new modern housing units. So there you go. There you go. There you go. I just wanted to share that with you all, right? Okay. Writing it down. Writing it down. And I appreciate the super chats, folks, and that's what makes the second half of the show good. But I mean, I've shown you a lot of things about North Korea and how North Korea is a country that's isolated, but it's isolated by sanctions, etc. But there's a lot of wealth there. There's a lot of minerals there. There's a lot of good things in North Korea, and a lot of good things. So just wanted to get that out there and let folks see that. Because people need to be aware of these kinds of developments. I mean, this is not the picture of North Korea that we get in mainstream American media, right? Actually, they just had a ceremony in North Korea. I mean, that's what I like about these YouTube channels, right? They show you a different side of North Korea. They show you the North Korea that we never get to see on American news, right? Whenever we see North Korea, what we see is we just see an endless amount of, it's almost like whenever they mention North Korea on American news, do this for me, do a countdown, right? So they say North Korea, Kim Jong-un or whatever, and then just count like 1, 2, 3, how high the number gets before you see soldiers goose stepping. They always show soldiers goose stepping whenever they mention North Korea on American television. Why? They're trying to subconsciously insert into your mind that North Korea is a Nazi country. That's what they're trying to do. They want you to believe that North Korea is a Nazi country when there's nothing Nazi about goose stepping, by the way. Many countries around the world do goose stepping. It's a Prussian military maneuver, right? It's been around. The Nazis didn't invent it or whatever. But every time they show North Korea on TV, they cut to soldiers goose stepping. And it's a psychological technique. Bruce Cummings talks about this. So I wanted to just get that out there as well. Just wanted to mention that as well. And, we're on here because ultimately we realize that it is in the interest of the American working class to resist the big banks and corporations that run the United States. It's in the interest of the American working class to see the United States move towards socialism, to dismantle this global system of monopoly capitalism. It's in our interest for the working class of the United States to control the means of production, have a society where the banks, factories, and industries and the centers of economic power are organized to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. That is ultimately what is in the interest of the American people. And that Wall Street and the imperialists, the same people that are attacking the Iranians, that are attacking the Cubans, that are attacking the Venezuelans, they are the same people that are destroying working class communities around the country. And it must be said. It must be said. And the Center for Political Innovation, we play an important role. We're getting the message out there, and we're challenging the status quo in the United States. And it needs to be done. Somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to do it. And it's late at night, and it's in the middle of the winter, and I'm in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, but I'm streaming here, and I must say, I look back. We're getting into late December. Today is December 13th. It'll be December 13th for another 20 minutes here in the here in Brooklyn. But we're getting towards the end of the year, and I think about this year. And this year we had an amazing conference in Austin, Texas, for the Center for Political Innovation, our first major public conference. We had an amazing training school in Lynn Valley, Kansas, where people from around the country gathered to get socialist education, to do group bonding activities. It was amazing. It was just an amazing gathering that we had. And then to top it all off, we had an amazing conference in Chicago, right? We had an amazing conference with Reid and Garland Nixon, and that was amazing. And we're going to be doing another big conference in March. I mean, 2023 hasn't already started. It hasn't started yet, but already We're planning to have a very big conference in March that's coming up. And it's very exciting. And there's different proposals around that. And I'm negotiating with different people about how we're going to do it. And I'm very excited. And I just want to tell you all how thankful I am for all of you. I really, from the bottom of my heart, am thankful. And yes, Garland's back on Twitter. Yes. Did you guys see that? Garland Nixon's back on Twitter. Go and follow Garland Nixon. He's back on Twitter. Garland Nixon is back on Twitter. That's a huge, huge step forward. We should be celebrating that. That's a great development. And, I'm really thankful for all of you because, it is hard to be an anti-imperialist and a revolutionary in the center of the empire. It's very hard. It is not an easy thing to do. And, they throw everything they have at us. And they try to divide us. They try to incite us against each other. But we persist. We keep going. And you all are here. And I'm here. And every day we keep going. We keep going because we know that truth is on our side. And justice is on our side. And we know that we will prevail, right? That the Russians are going to be victorious, that the people of the eastern regions that have voted to join with Russia, their ability to be part of their home country is going to be secured. Their self-determination is going to be secured. Taiwan is going to remain part of China. It will never be an independent country, a separate country. Taiwan is China. It's going to remain part of China. Korea is going to be unified. There will be one Korea. And the Korean people will be reunified, and socialism will come to all of the Korean peninsula, and socialism will evolve and adjust, and North Korea will be able to open up when it's not under military threat, and they'll be able to have market reforms and be prosperous. This is going to happen. We also know that Bolivarian socialism and what they have in Venezuela and what they have in Nicaragua is going to expand to all of south of the border. Eventually, the Bolivarian alternative for Latin America, what they have in Cuba, what they have in Nicaragua, what they have in Venezuela is going to be everywhere. And it's going to be everywhere in Latin America. We know this, right? And we also know that eventually the United States will join the new economy that is emerging from around the world. Eventually, we will have an America where the banks, factories, and industries and the centers of economic power are organized to serve the people. And there's already within the government apparatus, there's a layer of people emerging who don't buy into the idea that we have to be at war with the rest of the world. You got people like Tulsi Gabbard. You got people like Michael Flynn in the Pentagon. And there's a number of figures within the Pentagon and other things, and within the power structure that are realizing this, that want us to have a better relationship with Russia, want us to have a better relationship with Iran and Venezuela and Cuba and China. There's already a layer within our American deep state that knows for a fact that they're going to lose and realizes that it would be better to have a strong economy in America for American working families than it would be to have, this global financial empire that makes Wall Street bankers rich while the whole world gets poorer and is driven further into chaos. And there are divisions within our ruling class. And those divisions within the ruling class create an opening for the people, right? As the ruling class gets divided, as the anti-imperialist countries get stronger, that creates a moment for us to insert ourselves into the historical narrative and say, you know what? We want jobs for American workers. We want schools for our children. We want our, the next generation to be able to go to college without getting into debt. We want health care for our population. We want the profits from America's oil to go into the American economy. We want an economy that serves public good. We want to rebuild this economy. And that there is emerging already within the U.S. power structure forces that have the potential to become socialists. They're not socialists yet. They're not anti-imperialists yet, but they're getting there. They're becoming conscious and becoming aware of where their economic interest lies. They're starting to realize that the main enemy of humanity is the imperialists. When I say the imperialists, I'm not talking about people who advocate certain policies. The imperialists are the Wall Street monopolists, the big corporations, big banks, the ultra monopoly corporations that are trying to keep the world poor so that they can stay rich. They are the enemies of humanity. And everyone who believes in economic growth, the working class, the lower level capitalists, the countries around the world that have broken free, all of them have a common interest in defeating the imperialists. The only way the imperialists can stay in power is to grind the world further into poverty so that they can stay rich. But growth is the rallying cry. That's what the Belt and Road Initiative from China is about. And that is what the Eurasian Economic Union led by Russia is about. And that's what the BRICS, the new economic union of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That's what the BRICS is about. And that's what the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America is about. There is an alternative that is emerging, an alternative economy that believes in growth. And the death economy based on accumulation through destruction that is based in the West, the death economy, the Shaktian fascist economy of the West, where the only way they can envision the economy getting better is grinding people further into poverty and degrowing and killing off the population. The suicide, medical assisted suicide, opioid assisted suicide, death economy, the Netflix pornography economy of Western capitalism. That is something that the global working class and the global population is largely rejecting. Humanity is rejecting this. Humanity wants to live. It doesn't want to die. And even though that humanity dying is the only way Wall Street can stay in power, it's the only way London can stay in power, sure. But humanity's not going to just let itself be killed so that the imperialists can keep their system going. And country after country after country has broken free. And we are going to keep fighting. And the Center for Political Innovation will lay the basis for the new layer of anti-imperialists and revolutionaries to emerge within U.S. society. And we're doing amazing things. And we're excited about what we're doing. And we're going to keep doing them. And we're going to keep marching ahead. And so I just want to tell you all how grateful I am for all that you've done this year, all the support, all that you've endured, all the hardships, all the way that you've stayed with us this year, because we are not going to surrender, right? The new economy, the Belt and Road, the alternative economy is marching ahead, and it's going to come to the United States. And we're going to have an economy here based on growth. We're going to have a government of action that will fight for working families. We're going to have that here in America. We will have that soon. I am very, very confident. No doubt in my mind. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But, I figure before we get to the super chat questions, before we get to the second half of our show, we do the roll call and all of that, since Garland Nixon is back on Twitter, why don't we celebrate that? I thought it might be good. Why don't we show Garland Nixon's talk from the Chicago conference? I don't know if people got a chance to see it. It's been a bit since those talks the talk happened, but we'll just watch Garland Nixon's talk. It was a great, short presentation that he gave in Chicago. So we're going to put on Garland Nixon's presentation from the Unite Against the Imperialist conference that we did in Chicago. So I'm just going to put it on here. I'm just pulling it up. Just hold on with me. But I think it'd be good to remind people about what the atmosphere in that room was like. That conference was really something special. We work really, really hard at making our conferences special, right? Anyone can have an event where a couple people sit in a room and talk and somebody films it. Anybody can do that. Anybody can do that. But we did something very special, right? We work very, very hard on the staging and the lighting and the speeches and the music, because we're doing something special, right? We are doing something that is very different than other things. Anyone who's been to one of our events, one of our CPI conferences, it is not like any conference you've been to before. Many communist groups have events where someone gets up and reads the resolution that was put forward by the committee of the third committee of the fourth, it's really boring. Or a lot of them are woke, right? Now they get up and they're not interested in talking about Marxism or anti-imperialism. No. They just want to talk about how Puerto Rican transgender people are being oppressed by white male supporters of Vladimir Putin. That's not what the CPI conferences are like, right? We have a really, really special atmosphere that we create. We work really, really hard to have powerful events that get people pumped up about anti-imperialism, that get people pumped up about socialism. And, we're getting better at doing them every day. We did 2 of them in 2022. And they were both very successful. And we're going to do another one in March. We're already getting things together to do this other one that we're going to do in March. And things are coming together to do, we're going to do it even better because we learn every time we do them. We learn the art of doing them. We learn the art of working with the hotel. We learn the art of working with the camera crew, working with the audience. We did different things. At the recent one we did, we had all the CPI members, we had them all wear red berets, and we gave people red berets, and it really added something special. But anyway, I'm going to pull up, this is Garland Nixon's speech from the conference. And since Garland Nixon just got added back to Twitter, and he's a hero of our community, he's an ally and a good friend of the Center for Political Innovation, I thought we'd just put on Garland Nixon's speech from the conference. So here you go. Here's Garland Nixon.
We're going to hear from another friend of mine, Garland Nixon. Garland Nixon is a longtime radio broadcaster. Garland Nixon has also, he's been to Venezuela and stood in solidarity with the people of Venezuela against U.S. sanctions and attacks. You can hear him on Pacifica Radio. You can hear him on Sputnik as well. Always great to listen to his program. I'm really honored for all the times I've been able to join you on the Critical Hour. Garland Nixon. Thank you.
Well, I wish I had some kind of chant or something. I feel so left out. But at any rate, first of all, let me say this. I first want to say a word to the national security state people who are monitoring this conference. I mean, we can't leave them out. No, we can't overlook these people. They're important. They're an important part of the movement. And I want to thank them. I want to thank them, oddly enough, for raiding the Uhuru movement. Why? Because I never heard of them before. I didn't know who they were. Uhuru, that didn't mean anything to me. And then a few weeks ago, some friends of mine, you may have heard of the Black Alliance for Peace, Jamu Baraka, they contact me, hey, here's what happened. And I'm like, well, I got to get them on immediately. And I was able to get Chairman O'Malley on my radio show in Los Angeles on KPFK with Dr. Rick Horn, and everyone heard him, and I got great feedback. And once again, just like the Russia sanctions, it boomeranged. They threw it out there, and it came back, wow, bam, right in the forehead. And so I think what we're looking at here is a situation where you look at what's happening and you're like, well, they're over there, they're arguing with the Iranians and they're, the Chinese and the Russians and everywhere. It's like a person who falls in the water and they can't swim. A dying man in the water, and he's reaching for anything he can to grab on to save himself because he knows that the situation is dire. I was in the Verizon store the other day, just before I left, and I walked in, just a person who was in, not politically motivated by any stretch of the imagination. And we started talking, and what she voiced to me was an understanding and a knowledge that this system is falling apart, that the leadership of this country isn't. I mean, it sounded like me talking, and this was not a radio talk show host. This was just your average person. So the problem they have is that people are waking up. People are becoming aware. We didn't do that. I didn't do that. You didn't do that. It's obvious. The system is coming apart at the seams, as it naturally would. When you come up with a system that only takes care of a tiny group of elite ruling class people at the top, and actually extracts the wealth. It doesn't disregard the others. It extracts the wealth of the others at the expense of the people at the bottom. And what's happening as the empire unravels, you see, the empire would go to Africa and do it. And they would get the gold and whatever they needed. They'd go to South America, and as that grew tougher now, they turn inward. And now there's student loans, and now a student gets out of college at 23 and they have a house payment and no house. And now they're extracting from the inside. They're extracting from everyone. And the people inside the empire who actually expected to benefit from empire. They expected, well, I'm on the inside, okay, they're out there doing whatever. I'll just turn my head away. I don't see that. And I get, and I'm not going to ask why I live in Maryland and I can buy apples that are grown an hour away in Westminster Orchard orchards for 89 cents a pound, for $1.99 a pound. But I can get bananas that are grown 3,000 miles away for 39 cents a pound. Because the empire is taking advantage of the people who grow the bananas. And they maybe have to pay the people here in America who grow them, they got to pay them a little bit more. I'm not going to ask that because I'm benefiting from cheap bananas. And that's what happens inside of the empire. The people expect to be able to benefit from empire, so they just keep their blinders on and they pretend that they don't see anything, and they can't anymore because now they are being consumed by the empire that went out to the indigenous people around the world and even here and took advantage of them for their cheap labor, whatever. Then they made the error, oh boy, there's lots of cheap labor in China, we'll just go get that. Because the Chinese people are inferior to us, and certainly they won't be productive enough to turn their opportunity into advancement. But they did, and now they don't know how to deal with that. And so here we sit in a situation where they're angry, they're raiding, they're at everybody. We're going after China, we're going after Russia. Oh, the world movement, while they're saying that we're screwing up, let's grab them. They're grabbing in every direction, but it's not going to do them any good because the person in the Verizon store who knows nothing about politics can see it. Now, just a real quick background. I'm not going to get into my background a lot. There's all kinds of stuff there. We could go on and on forever. But the one thing I'll say about my background, I was born, I always say when I was born, we were so poor, we thought the people in the welfare were the middle class. They see like, man, welfare, man, they got like heat in their houses, food and stuff like that. Hey, I thought they were doing pretty good. Something I didn't have, right? But something happened. My dad, third grade education, got a job as a longshoreman. He joined the ILA. He was a member of a union. He was able to make a living. He was able to take care of his family and put a roof. A person with no education and just a struggling background was able to join an organized labor organization. They were able to bring their power together to ensure that the people that were making lots of money gave them their fair share. And I learned about the importance of people who don't have anything binding together. The people at the top, and let me say this, having been around DC and having been around centers of power, I realized, because I go to these events with all the rich people and all this kind of stuff, and what I realized was this. When I go to those events, there wasn't no Democrats and Republicans there. There wasn't no right and left there. Those people were acutely aware of the issue of economic class. And they were in the same economic class, and that was their priority. Right? But yet, if you're at the bottom of the economic class, and now you want to have a discussion of economic class, well, you're wrong and you're going to upset America. Only the people at the top are able to do that. And we see the results. Now, we're living the results today. So I'll say this. I'm not going to keep it so long, but I'll say this. And this is important for me to bring to you. When I was younger, when I first got into radio, I was in this little low-power radio station, 100 watts. And I found a way to fake it and pretend like it was a big radio station, And I would go to these events and have a booth and all of these signs, and people thought it was a real radio station. So I went to this one. And I'm watching these people with like book TV stuff, right? From people that do book TV. I used to watch that all the time. And I see them all crowded around this guy, and I'm like, what's going on there? Maybe it's somebody I could interview. And I go over there, and it clears up, and I see this name tag, Paul Robeson Jr. There's a guy I got to talk to. I didn't know much about him. I didn't know much about socialism. I didn't know much, but I knew Paul Robeson Jr. Paul Robeson, great man. So I go over there. I ask him, I interview him. And fortunately for me, things worked out. He says, hey, let's go have lunch. And we had lunch. He gave me his phone number. He says, call me. When I get back to New York, we'll talk. And fortunately for me, Paul Robeson Jr. became my mentor for years. For years, Paul Robeson Jr. was my mentor. And that colored my vision of politics. And I studied Paul Robeson, and I would advise everyone here who doesn't know about Paul Robeson to study Paul Robeson, because America had to try, the whole West had to try to write him out of history, because who he was and what he did was so powerful. And I learned so much from Paul Jr., and I remember one of the things that he talked about, activism. And he talked about, working towards things. And what he said was, look, Garland, you gotta understand something. He said, movements are about timing. He said, whatever you're advocating for, you keep working on it, and working on it. And when the time is right, when people are ready, when the situation is right, your movement, if you're doing the right thing, will start to take hold. And I think that's what this is about. This is about people who have been for years saying, this system is unfair. This system only takes care of a few. This system is concentrating power. And people wouldn't listen to that. Why? Because they could get bananas for 39 cents a pound. Who cares? I get bananas for 39 cents a pound. And so the argument in the so-called left here in America was what? The argument was, who gets a bigger slice of the pie? That was the argument in the left here. Hey, do I get a big slice? You got a big, well, these people, right? And unions, it was who gets a slice of the pie? Everybody talked about, it's not fair. If we could just get this pie divvied up equally, then everything would work right. But we never had a discussion about all the brown and black bodies that were baked into that pie. That's imperialism. And now, we don't have to have that discussion. Let's be honest about this issue, what's going on in Ukraine. Let's be honest about it. Not a single country in Africa has agreed and is going along with the United States. Outside of the countries that are vassals in Asia, that ain't happening either. How about South America? How about the Caribbean? How about the Middle East? The United States has the nerve to go to Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, all countries that have had genocides at the hands of the United States, and say, oh yeah, can you join with us against China? Yes, sir, Reid. We got to stop these Chinese. But when we look at it, what happens? We see that now that the colonial powers that for centuries have abused the rest of the world and have claimed that they were economically, they were socially, they were morally superior to the rest of the world, and that's why they were doing so well, now the reality is coming out. Because there are other options. Now the United States goes to Africa and says, don't do business with the Chinese. And the Africans are like, hey man, it's working out for us. Sorry, we can't help it. Now when I go to Venezuela, and I go way out into the mountains in a little town, and I see this sign, Socialist Village, right? And it's like this big, it was like an apartment complex the size of a small town. And what was it? It was the government building homes for the poor. Yep, it's yours. And I go in there, and I'm talking to the people, and there's these little women, this tall, little women. And they come up to me, and the vest we had on, had what country we were from, and it had American flag on it. And they looked at me and they said, you go back and you tell the Americans, we will fight for our democracy. Right? And I say to myself, you're not defeating that. Because it's in the hearts of the people. And why is it? You put it in the hearts of the people. You oppress these people. They know, they use the word neoliberalism. Oh, why? Because you went to their country. People are like, well, the pink tide, red tide, whatever's going on now. You know what they said to me? They said, well, you call it socialism, whatever. We've been living this way for 10,000 years. This is our way of life. We all look out for each other, right? That's the way they live. So when you go there and you see that these people suffered at the hands of colonialism, and they're saying, never again. You know what I mean? You can do whatever you want, but we ain't going back to that. And the U.S. says, well, we will sanction you, we will do this. Only makes them madder. Only thing it does is it pisses them off. And what it does is it reveals to them even more the evilness of the system that they're against. They're saying, man, you guys are worse than we thought. We knew you were bad economically, but now you're just going to starve us right to death. Well, we know we got to stand up against that. And again, it boomerangs. The more they do to expose themselves, the more that the people of the world see it. And now we have a situation where the people of the world, and see, this is what's upsetting the neocons. You know, I can say the United States, I can use whatever word I want. Neocolonialism, the empire, this stuff didn't just start yesterday. You know, they've been doing this for 100 years. This is, you know, we can go with opium wars, we can go on and on and on, right? This system, they are exposing to people in their desperation just how bad it is. And that makes people look at other options and opportunities. And now the problem they have is that's happening. Russia and China are rising. And let me add this. I think this is important. And in trying to push Russia and China away economically, what they're doing is they're creating a dynamic where it's in the best interest of the Russians and the Chinese to say, well, this is not a market where we can work with people and sell ourselves. So it's in our best interest to help to build up Africa, build up the Middle East, build up, to help to work with and build these other parts of the world that were traditionally held down so we can all do business and work together. They are creating a dynamic of their own economic doom. And I'll say this, and I'm not here to say, I hate America, I hate Europe, I hate this, I hate that. I'm here to say this. I know the difference, and I know that there is a difference between the words and symbols we use to refer to something and that thing we're referring to. So when I say America, that's just a word. It's a word. What is America? It's a noun. But the question is, what is it referring to? When I say Europe, what is it referring to? So if I say, well, I love America, what am I referring to when I say America? I can talk about the people, love the people. I can talk about, you see what I'm saying? So in reality, when it comes down to it, they're like, well, you guys, you hate America. What do you mean when you say America? What are you referring to? It's just a noun. It doesn't mean anything. So ultimately, here's people saying, we love America. If you understand what we're talking about, we're not talking about a small group of wealthy people. We're talking about a group, we're talking about we love, and what we want is a place where my father and anybody else's father with a third-grade education can join a union that will give him fair representation so that when Company X or whoever makes whatever this money is out there, that the workers are fairly compensated. That's we're some evil beings if we just want people to be fairly compensated? That if people, regardless of their color, of their race, or whatever, are able to go out and to express what they want to express, and whether we agree with it or not. You don't have to, look, first of all, you don't have to have any kind of special laws to protect someone that stands on the street and says, yay, I'm for the Republican or Democratic Party. You need laws to protect someone who says unpopular speech. And that's what we're for. That's what we believe in. So I just say to everyone today, I don't have a lot more, but I say to everyone, it is important to understand history. And again, when I went out to Venezuela, let me say this, I'll tell you something that shocked me. I was about to say it, but I'll say this. Also, I learned so much. I'll go out to these little villages, right? And I saw something that I'm not accustomed to, because one of the things they do here in an attempt to keep poor people down, to keep black people down, to keep people down, is they don't educate you. They do everything they can to keep you from getting a decent education, keep you ignorant, then you don't know. But I went out to these little villages and I talked to these people. Their knowledge of history and politics was incredible. And I'm like, wow, you guys really, whoa, you know, and they're going back to Simon Bolivar and such, and they're going on. I'm like, this is incredible. And they said, yeah, that was part of the Chavez movement. Was educating people, was giving them history, right? And giving them knowledge to empower them. Because you know what? Because no matter what, if you have knowledge and an understanding of history, you can move forward. You're powerful. You can always build a movement with knowledge, keeping people ignorant and then just feeding them whatever you want to feed them. Forget history. This just happened. Why, the Ukraine thing just started on February 24th. Nothing before that. You don't want to look backwards. And I understood the power in knowledge and the power in empowering people through knowledge, through waking up to the reality around them. And I just feel like that this group and this organization is about that. And I really appreciate what you're doing. And I really appreciate the fact that you took the time out to invite me here. Mr. Common Radio guy. And last but not least, once again, and we should do this, I thank the national security state, because what they're doing in the same way, let me say this, in the same way that the millionaires and billionaires, as they grab the money up, you know, during COVID, they took all of this money. Oh, well, man, we got it all. But that woke a lot of people up. Right? The things that they're doing to grab money and to hold people down and all that, they're smiling, yay, we're getting away with everything. In the short term, you are. You're getting it. But in the long term, you're waking people up. And the national security state, in oppressing people who are trying to express their constitutional rights, in going after the Huru movement, who are exercising their constitutional rights. That's a whole other discussion. Because I've always said, as Malcolm X, I don't believe that black people are citizens in this country. I don't believe we're citizens. That's a long discussion. But the bottom line is, what they're doing in their ham-handed way, they're doing more work to wake people up than we could ever hope for. And I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank the Uhuru movement, and thank Caleb Maupin. Thank you.
So there we go. Yeah, that was Garland Nixon's presentation. And we are going to have many other amazing anti-imperialist conferences with the Center for Political Innovation. It's going to be great. So, all right, everybody, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. And now we're going to do our roll call. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? We'll see who's here, and then I'll start answering super chats. And if folks have any other questions they want me to answer, by all means, shoot me a super chat, and I will answer your questions. We got Gavin in Western Illinois, longtime friend. We got John Whitty in Houston. We got Nate on vacation. We got Sam Price in West Virginia. Very, very good. We got, yeah, that could be a reason. We got Cedar Park, Texas. We got Mexico. We got Yulia from Long Beach. We got Steve Morris in Riverside County. Lionel from Melbourne. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati. Nuclear Fallout Shelter, Lori. We got Carolyn and Dario from Brooklyn. Stephen in Boston. Moonlight, California. Raleigh, North Carolina. West Virginia. I think I saw Ryan from Oakland was here. We got Bob Troy in New York. Jan Kowalski in Mongolia. We got Kieran from San Diego. We got Los Angeles Ishmael, David Grass Valley, Bob Troy in New York. Welcome, 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 everybody. They're coming in fast. I can't keep up with all of them, but that's good. That's good. We got Ryan in California, Steve in Boston, Joe from San Francisco. We got Moonlight Beach. We got Heidi from Edelweiss, Scotland, Mindanao to Midwest, Lumpia Logic, Hawaii, Kentucky, Edward Allen in Kentucky, Joe from Los Angeles, Chris in Salt Lake City. We got Patch in Arizona, Juan from Ecuador, La La Land, Kentucky to present, Kendall in San Diego. Very, very good stuff, folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you all here with us. We got Richard Sawaki from Eden. We got Gary Curtis from Indiana. We got Upper West Side, New York City, Communist Front. Very, very good. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Micah from Las Vegas is with us, right? With his emoji from the movie They Live, which has always been a favorite of mine. Very, very, very good. Very, very, very good. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Chris in Salt Lake City. Chris Conway. Welcome, Chris. So glad to have you here. Very, very good. All right, everybody. Now I will start answering super chat questions. So if you have another thing, we got Marta in Poland is with us. If you got another thing you want me to talk about, by all means, shoot me another super chat, and I will start answering. The first one is thoughts on Xi Jinping's visit to Saudi Arabia. Well, look, Saudi Arabia, it's another case of, this is the irony here, okay? And this is not a simple thing to understand, okay? But it's important that we understand this, okay? Because these things get complicated, right? During the Cold War, the general way that leftists talked about governments like Saudi Arabia, governments like Pinochet in Chile, the way we talked about it was we pointed out that the USA says it wants freedom and democracy. But look, it's aligned with Park Chung-hee, the dictator of South Korea. Look, it's aligned with Saudi Arabia, the head-chopping absolute monarchy. Look, it's aligned with Pinochet and in Chile. And that's hypocrisy. And that was true. That was absolutely true. That was correct. But there's more to it than that. There's more to it than that. Because during the Cold War, the Soviet Union existed. There were a number of countries that were aligning with the Soviet Union. And if a country like Saudi Arabia or South Korea or Chile were becoming more and more unstable, that could open the door to some kind of communist revolution. So the United States did everything it could to make sure that countries aligned with it were stable. Why was that? The reason was that if these societies were stable, there was no danger of them slipping into the communist sphere. Right? When the first dictator they had of South Korea, the first dictator they had was Syngman Rhee. And Syngman Rhee was not stable. There was a lot of poverty. The students were protesting labor unrest. So they brought in a new dictator, Park Chung-hee, and he stabilized South Korea by bringing in some level of economic development. He was a military dictator, and military dictators hand out the goods, right? And he started a state-run steel company called POSCO, and he eventually laid the foundations for Samsung and the electronics company, and they let him do some level of development. As long as he was solidly in the U.S. camp, he was preventing communism from spreading to South Korea. And the same for a number of the strongmen, the military hard-time regimes, a lot of these hardliner regimes, these were Bonapartist military regimes that the United States was backing up. And Saudi Arabia is kind of like that. The House of Saud, which is the royal family of Saudi Arabia, they were basically picked by the British and the Americans. During the Russian Revolution, the Bolsheviks leaked. They did WikiLeaks 1917. And they leaked a bunch of secret treaties, right? During World War I, the Russians were aligned with the British and the Americans and the French against the Germans. They had a lot of agreements between them. One of the agreements was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and it drew out a map of the Middle East. And it basically divided up the Middle East between some countries were colonies, like, Syria was a colony of the French, and then some countries were handed out to hand-picked kings, right? Iraq had a hand-picked king by the British. Libya had a hand-picked king. Well, in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, they drew the borders and they handed most of the Arabian Peninsula to the House of Saud, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They appointed the Saudi king and the Saudi royal family to run this region, and the British picked the Saudis and they said, you can do your thing. And the Saudis were Wahhabis. They believed in a very, very strict interpretation of Islam, where you must have an absolute monarchy, where people don't have their rights. And the idea was that because they were such fanatical religious people, and because they'd proven to be very ruthless and very good at running an absolute monarchy, that the British gave them control of most of the Arabian Peninsula. And they made a deal. They made a deal that they would allow American and British oil companies to have exclusive rights to their oil. They would set up a royal oil company, but it would just kind of be a middleman for American and British oil companies. And they would get a certain amount of the money. They would get a certain layer of the money from the oil proceeds, and they could take care of the royal family. They could take care of their own to some degree or other. And that was the House of Saud. Right, and they got control. The thing is that, in order to stay in power, they got to be strong, right? And, while most of Saudi Arabia at this point, 1/3 of the country are guest worker slaves that have no rights whatsoever. Right? They're people from other countries, people from Africa, people from Southeast Asia, Thailand, places like that. Those people have no rights, people from Sri Lanka and all of that, and they work them to death and they exploit them. On top of that, the Shia Muslims of Saudi Arabia, because they practice Shia Islam, their rights are also, not respected, and their leaders get their heads cut off all the time. They're only allowed to work in jobs that have manual labor. They're the oil field workers. They're not respected. But if you're not a Shia Muslim and you're not a guest worker, if you're a Saudi citizen, right, and you're part of, the Saudi family, a Saudi family that's been there for a while, you get some goods handed out to you. They send you a stipend. You get your little percentage of the oil profits, right? And if you're high up in the royal family, your stipend is like bigger, and that they take care of their own. And that's why Saudi Arabia has been very stable. It's been very stable, but there's not much development there. I mean, it's got oil and sand, right? They have very little factories, very little development. They don't have much. They don't have much. And it's just, it's a kingdom of Bedouin, right? And they live in tents. They literally have tents. Now, these tents are huge, the size of houses, and they have air conditioners, and they live in these tents in the desert. And, they hand out the oil money. If you're a Saudi citizen and you're not a Shia and you're not a guest worker, you get like a little stipend and you're taken care of. And they have this autocratic, authoritarian society in the middle of the desert. And that's Saudi Arabia. And very famously, after the Iranian Revolution happened, the Reagan administration said, we will never allow a revolution in Saudi Arabia. And when the Shia oil workers seized Mecca, I read that was on my timeline. I read to you all in the early 80s, 1981, 1980, the Shia oil workers, they were inspired by the Islamic Revolution of Iran. They rose up and they seized Mecca. Hundreds of them were killed. There was a bloodbath. Ronald Reagan's administration said, we will never allow a revolution in Saudi Arabia, right? And it's like, in order to keep Saudi society together, we're going to let the Saudi royal family hand out the goods. We're going to let them do that in exchange for stability. That was the idea. But you'll notice that as the Soviet Union fell, a lot of these authoritarian regimes that the USA had armed and propped up and tolerated also started falling. Franco's government in Spain, the fascist regime in Spain, it fell. The Portuguese fascist government, it also fell. In the late 80s, Pinochet's government fell. And that, a lot of these regimes that the USA had installed, the USA was saying, we really don't need these people here. And they're very expensive. Having these authoritarian military dictatorships, you can't have an authoritarian military dictatorship if it's not handing out the goods to somebody, right? It can be, Park Chung-hee. He had concentration camps for homeless children. He was vicious. He, beat down the labor movement, but he built up Seoul and he built up certain cities and he built up a middle class of people that were loyal to him. And same for Pinochet. Pinochet tried neoliberalism in the 70s and it wrecked the economy of Chile. So starting in the 80s, he renationalized things and he started re-spending money on the economy and started stabilizing Chile. And so he built up a middle class that was loyal to him. And that's generally how Bonapartist authoritarian regimes, fascist regimes, that's how they work. Somebody you have to have a big layer of the population that benefits, or else it doesn't work. And it's kind of like imperialism. You can't do imperialism without the labor aristocracy. You have to have that comfortable middle class of well-paid workers who are bought off. You're going to have an authoritarian Bonapartist regime. You have to have a layer of people who benefit from it to some degree or other, or it doesn't work, right? Or else people won't take it. People don't like authoritarianism, but they'll put up with it if they see their living standard go up. If they're getting better access to jobs and education, a certain layer of society benefits from it, they'll tolerate it. It was the same with Marcos in the Philippines. A lot of people in the Philippines, didn't like Marcos and were living under it, but there was a layer of the population that benefited from Marcos existing, and so they tolerated it. And that's how these Bonapartist authoritarian regimes work. And that's the United States had to tolerate these people to prevent communist revolutions. The feeling is, hey, it's better to have Marcos and him taking care of that middle class in the Philippines than the communists overthrow and socialism in the Philippines. It's better to have, Pinochet taking care of the middle class in Chile than it is to have communists running the place. So the USA had to tolerate it. But as the Soviet Union fell, starting in the late 70s, they started to realize we don't need these regimes anymore. We don't need them, and they're expensive. And we can get a much better deal if we force these countries to sell off all their state assets. So instead of having an authoritarian regime, they started with the doctrine of the broken society. And Olympia is exactly right? Marcos, yeah, he was bad to some degree, but they had to tolerate a level of industrialization. But they got rid of him, and they replaced Marcos with an open society. Right? That's George Soros, the Open Society Institute. They start bringing in an open society. And when you have an open society, meaning you have a weak government, an open society where the government just sits there and goes, oh, we can't do anything. It's a weak government. Those weak governments, they don't have to hand out the goods to anybody. They don't have to do anything. And they just roll over, and the USA can just milk these countries for all they're worth. And in Bolivia, and in Ecuador, and all these countries, they transitioned to democracy. They got rid of the military dictator, and they brought in like a weak, pathetic government that got elected and said, I don't know what to do. And then they would have a financial crisis, and then the leader would resign, and they'd have another election, and another guy would get in there and go, I don't know what to do. Oh, boy. He would be out, and then they'd elect another guy, and he'd go, I don't know what to do. Oh, boy. And they would just elect kind of like what we have in here with Joe Biden, a weak, pathetic government that just rolls over and can't do anything, right? And it's if you just want to loot a country economically, if you're not looking to have a solid block against the commies, it's much better to have an open society where it looks like, oh, everyone can say whatever they want and freedom of speech and all of that. And you make sure that you have no government that ever gets in there is strong enough to actually take a stand. That's what we have in most of the third world. But the Saudis, they built the Saudis. They put the House of Saud in there. And the House of Saud is one of these authoritarian, Bonapartist, authoritarian societies where they put a royal family in there. And they teach all the little kids in Saudi Arabia that king was put on the throne by God, and that Shia Islam is a Jewish conspiracy against the Saudi king, and that Saudi Arabia is this ordained. It is the continuation of what the Prophet Muhammad wanted. They have a very authoritarian regime there. And the USA put up with it because it was a barrier against communism. And it was a barrier against, the Iranian Islamic Revolution. And it was a barrier against something else. And they could pump the oil out of there, right? So the USA tolerated it. But now we've got this thing called hydraulic fracking. Now the USA produces more oil than it imports. And so the US leaders are like, yeah, we don't really need them that much. And on top of that, Saudi Arabia, it's very expensive. And the value that the Saudis have in the United States has decreased. And then the Saudis have kind of realized that there is a layer within the United States that doesn't like them. For example, the Obama administration sucked up to one of Saudi Arabia's greatest enemies, the Muslim Brotherhood. The Saudis are Wahhabi Muslims. And Wahhabis, they believe in, the 1400s government, an authoritarian autocratic regime. Well, in Turkey and Qatar, they have the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood, they believe in what they call westernized Islam, where they believe that they believe in Western capitalism. They believe in the free market. They want to modernize their societies. Well, Obama realized that using the Muslim Brotherhood and using Qatar and Turkey to funnel weapons into Syria and funnel weapons into Libya was a very good move. But the Saudis hate the Muslim Brotherhood. The Saudis consider the Muslim Brotherhood to be a terrorist group. And the Muslim Brotherhood hates the Saudis and vice versa. And you'll notice that after the USA basically, backed the Egyptian revolution and Hosni Mubarak, the strong man of Egypt, was removed, who did they elect? They elected a Muslim Brotherhood guy. And Saudi Arabia looked at that and they said, we hate the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Saudis didn't like that. And so the Saudis worked with another strong man in the military, and they ousted Mohammed Morsi. And they put in a pro-Saudi guy. Now, the USA has a relationship with that pro-Saudi guy in Egypt, but the Saudis did not like the fact that the United States was friendly with Mohammed Morsi because they were afraid he would spread his westernized Islam into Saudi Arabia. And so Saudi Arabia is saying, hey, America, you're our friend. Why are you cuddling up to Turkey? Why are you cuddling up to Qatar? And why are you constantly criticizing us? So there's tension there. And at the end of the day, the USA doesn't need to tolerate a Bonapartist, authoritarian, autocratic regime in Saudi Arabia like they used to. And so they've started to put pressure on Saudi Arabia. When Obama went to Saudi Arabia, Michelle Obama didn't wear a headscarf. And that was a taunt. That was a taunt at Saudi Arabia, right? Usually for years when American first ladies have gone to Saudi Arabia, because it's the law in Saudi Arabia that women have to cover up, the first lady wears a headscarf. But when Michelle Obama went to Saudi Arabia, Obama, who's supposed to be a secret Muslim, right? Obama's like, look, we're going to have Michelle not wear a headscarf. Why? Because we don't have to respect you, Saudi Arabia, because you're dickwads. And we sell you weapons, we buy your oil, but we can do whatever we want because I'm Barack Obama. And, I like Turkey better than you. And I like Qatar better than you. So Michelle is not going to wear a headscarf. So take that up yours, Saudi Arabia. Yep, there we go. There we go. And they just basically, what are they going to do? She's the first lady of the United States. And Barack Obama was saying, oh, well, screw you. And it was pretty clear that the Democrats have gotten to the point where they're like, we got fracking oil coming in and the Saudis are getting a little bit too big for their britches. And Saudi Arabia is saying, okay, well, if that's the case, we're going to negotiate with Russia a little bit more because Russia's a major oil exporting country. And the Saudi king and the Russians are constantly on the phone because they decide how much oil they're going to pump. And the amount of oil they pump makes the oil price go up and it makes the oil price go down. So Saudi Arabia has to constantly be negotiating with Russia. They got to negotiate with Russia because if not, there's a lot of money to be gained and lost, right? They got to, they sit there and OPEC and Russia, and they sit there and they negotiate about how the oil prices. So Saudi Arabia has to have a relationship with Russia so they can negotiate these things. The United States is like, well, we hate Russia. Russia's our enemy. No one should talk to Russia about anything. And the Saudis are like, well, actually, we kind of do because we're a major oil exporter. They're a major oil exporter. So I think we're going to talk to Russia. And they're like, Joe Biden's like, nope, you're not going to talk to Russia. Russia's bad. Don't talk to them. The Saudis are like, we kind of have to because all of our revenue comes in from oil. And yeah, we're going to talk to them. And the United States is telling Saudi Arabia, you need to coordinate with us. Stop talking to the Russians. We'll tell you how much oil to pump. Joe Biden goes there and he says, now you pump the oil the way we tell you to. And the Saudis like, no, I think we're going to talk to the Russians. We're going to work it out. And basically, the United States is at the point where they don't need Saudi Arabia anymore. And Saudi Arabia realizes the United States doesn't need to prop them up like it once did. And so they're realizing that they don't have to obey the United States like they once did. And the United States is realizing they don't have to coddle Saudi Arabia the way they once did. And the U.S.-Saudi relationship is going to hell. And what will this ultimately lead to? It may lead to a color revolution in Saudi Arabia. It would be amazing for American oil companies if they could demolish Saudi Arabia, right? If they could have the, and it might happen, right? And, it may be that they one day they get to the point where the USA says, you know what? If all that Saudi oil disappeared from the market, the oil prices would go through the roof. And it may be that the USA decides to demolish Saudi Arabia. However, Saudi Arabia doesn't want that. And throughout the region, all the chaos that would lead to throughout the region, Iran wouldn't want that. Most of the region wouldn't want that. They don't like what Saudi Arabia does. It's a puppet of the United States, but Saudi Arabia getting demolished, they wouldn't like that. And so Saudi Arabia is realizing the Americans may actually just try to pull their open society shit in Saudi Arabia. And they might decide, Saudi Arabia is a little bit too expensive, and why don't we take all of their oil off the market? If Saudi Arabia was cast into chaos and, terrorist groups were battling each other for control of it, there might be a lot of money there. And that would, and so Saudi Arabia is realizing the Americans may actually try to terminate us. So Saudi Arabia is drifting closer to China and it's drifting closer to Russia. And it's still, yes, buying all the weapons from the United States. Yes, it's still primarily almost exclusively doing business with American oil companies, but they're sending a lot more oil to China and they're calling up Russia to negotiate the oil prices. And Saudi Arabia realizes that the Americans at this point don't need them. The reason that Saudi Arabia was able to get away with everything it got away with, and the reason they were able to have their 1400s autocratic monarchy was because they kind of had America, for lack of better expression, they had America by the balls, right? America needed their oil and it needed control of the international oil markets. And so it was like, you know what, Saudi Arabia will give you all the weapons you want. We'll let you, pile the money on the Saudi royal family and take care of your own people just so long as, you do what we say. And that was the relationship. Saudi Arabia is no longer that important to the United States. The United States knows that. And the U.S.-Saudi relationship is going south very, very quickly. And we don't know how this will develop. Right now, let's keep in mind, the USA is still selling all the weapons to Saudi Arabia. So that's happening. And American oil companies, British oil companies still dominate the Saudi oil market. But things could change very quickly. Things could change very, very quickly. And so, for Xi Jinping to go to the Saudis and say, look, hey, the Americans are... their system is falling apart. You really ought to get friendlier to us. You really ought to get friendlier to the Russians because we can do better deal. That makes sense. It makes perfect sense. And it makes sense for the Chinese to go there and say, look, who's really your friends here, Saudi Arabia? China, we have a policy. We never export our system. The last thing China would ever do is foment a color revolution in Saudi Arabia. However, the United States might. Right? In order to bring false scarcity to the oil markets, in order to clear out an autocratic Bonapartist regime that they tolerated for so long, the United States might meddle in Saudi Arabia's affairs. China would never do that. So, that's my thoughts on that whole thing. Next question, usury. Usury is lending money at interest, right? In in the Bible, Christianity, they call it usury. In Islam, they call it ribald, but it's lending money at interest, right? That is what that refers to. And it's a problematic thing because it leads to a creditor class, a group of people who make money by having money. They just happen to have money, so they can lend money and get it paid back at interest, and they have more money, right? They don't actually produce anything. The problem with usury is it doesn't produce anything. It just, it just leads to wealth being created by other wealth. And the more that usury and speculation become part of an economy, the weaker the economy becomes, because you can have growth without having any physical growth in physical economy. All right. How should Marxists treat Saudi Arabia in this new era? Well, let me just put it this way. I'll answer the Saudi question because we're on Saudi Arabia right now. Right? I did the usury thing real quick. We're on Saudi Arabia. Right? Communists. Historically, there's the U.S. imperialists, which are the main danger. There's Western capitalism and imperialism. But there are Bonapartist regimes that go either way. Thailand, for example. During the Vietnam War, there was Sihanouk, right? His name was Sihanouk, right? He was the leader of Cambodia. And he was a very important ally for the Vietnamese people and against the U.S. imperialists. And he was a king. He was like an autocratic king. I mean, he was the king of Cambodia, but he moved in an anti-imperialist direction. Sihanouk. There's many examples of this. I read to you, Father Divine was this preacher in Harlem in the 1930s. He was this pastor in Harlem, Father Divine, who claimed he was Jesus's second coming. He was the reincarnation, and he was an important leader of the black community. So the Communist Party, they realized, hey, he's a leader of black people. He's against U.S. society with its racism. He's anti-fascist. And they sat down with Father Divine and they made a deal, right? And North Korea and Thailand get along very well. North Korea and Cambodia, they get along very well. And, there's a lot of governments around the world that are kind of, anti-imperialist or, they're Bonapartist regimes that could go either way, that the Soviet Union had to sit down and make a deal with. They never said that these countries were socialist. No one thinks that Cambodia under Sihanouk was socialist. It wasn't. Nobody thinks that Thailand is socialist. Nobody thinks that, no one thought that Father Divine in Harlem, no one thought he was a communist. He wasn't a communist. He was a religious fanatic. However, they understood this guy is in a position where he's up against the U.S. imperialists. He's up against the U.S. imperialists. He's a leader of the black community. The black community is rallying around Father Divine. He's up against the U.S. imperialists. And so we're going to make an alliance with him. So they made a deal. And, Sihanouk was up against the U.S. imperialists. He made a deal with the Vietnamese people. And there's many examples of this. Turkey, right? Kemal Ataturk. Not a socialist, a Bonapartist, an anti-imperialist, but not a socialist. And there's many examples of this, of not just governments like Saudi Arabia, not just, governments, but also political movements, etc., that are, for whatever reason, at odds with U.S. imperialism and the liberal order. And for whatever reason, they are at odds with the U.S. imperialism and the liberal order. And if you're a serious communist, you go to those folks and you make a deal. And you say, look, we don't agree on everything, but we're communists and anti-imperialists. Your enemies are our enemies. We both want similar things. And so we can find an understanding. We can find something to agree on. And serious revolutionaries do that. And not serious revolutionaries don't, okay? And this is what a lot of people don't get, right? Nowadays, there's this cancel culture where it is totally okay to align with mainstream U.S. media and whoever they're canceling this week for racism, sexism, or homophobia and transphobia. It's perfectly fine to align with Joe Biden against Donald Trump and call Donald Trump a fascist. That's fine. But the second you align with any illiberal entity that is at odds with U.S. society, you get canceled for it. But that's exactly who we should be aligning with. Right now in America, there are religious organizations. Not going to name names, but eventually we're going to have a conversation about this. Right now in America, there are religious organizations that have been targeted by the liberal order, that are at odds with the liberal order, that take anti-imperialist positions internationally for their own reasons that have nothing to do with communism. If we're serious revolutionaries, we should be making a deal with those folks. All right? They're under attack by Steve Hassan and the Cult Awareness Network, just like we are. They're sympathetic to socialist and anti-imperialist countries, just like we are. We ought to be making a deal with them if we're serious. Now, of course, the way standard leftism works is no, you're associated with this person, they're homophobic. Oh, no, you're associated with this person, they're transphobic. Oh, but, you're following the latest hashtag on Twitter put out by Joe Biden. Well, that's normal. You're just fighting racism. This is the way people are thinking. But there are religious organizations in the United States that are at odds with the current liberal order. And if we're serious, we should be sitting down with those folks and saying, all right, we may not agree on much, but the liberal order hates us. We are sympathetic to various anti-imperialist states. We're against tech censorship. We don't like the way you guys have been targeted. Let's make a deal. That's what the Communist Party did with Father Divine. That's what the Soviet Union did with many, many countries that the imperialists were fighting, were targeting, right? And there were many monarchies around the world. The Emir of Afghanistan. I always keep coming back to this, but this is so important. If you know anything about anti-imperialism, right after the Bolshevik Revolution, Lenin convened a conference in Azerbaijan called the Baku Conference. It was the Conference of the Peoples of the East. And at that conference, all kinds of people from Central Asia and from the Middle East came to that conference, and the Bolsheviks said, if you're against the British Empire, if you're against the American imperialists, we're with you. And one of the people who came to that conference was called the Emir of Afghanistan. The Emir of Afghanistan was not a socialist by any conceivable means. He was not a socialist. The Emir of Afghanistan was a feudal monarch. But the British imperialists wanted him out because he believed in economic development. He wasn't going to go along with their free trade policies. And Lenin embraced the Emir of Afghanistan because he said, you're fighting the U.S. imperialists, I'm with you. So if Lenin can embrace the Emir of Afghanistan, there may come a time where we have to embrace the Saudis. Now, we're not there yet. The Saudis are not full-on anti-imperialists yet. But if they become full-on anti-imperialists, we may have to embrace them. And I'm going to send you the Emir. I'll put it in the chat. You need to read this, right? Because it's really, really important, right? It's really important. This is Lenin's statement. This is the statement Lenin gave to the Emir of Afghanistan because he was against the imperialists. He's a reactionary, feudal autocrat, but he was against the U.S. imperialists and the British imperialists, and they were coming after him. So in 1919, October 14th, 1919, Comrade Lenin met the ambassador in his private office with the words, I am very glad to see in the red capital of the worker and peasant government the representative of the friendly Afghan people who are suffering and fighting against imperialist oppression. To which the ambassador replied, I proffer you a friendly hand and hope that you will help the people of the East to free itself from European imperialism. And during that talk that followed, Lenin said that Soviet power, the power of working people and the oppressed, was striving toward the very goal the Afghan ambassador extraordinary had spoken about, that it was necessary that the Muslim East should realize this and help Soviet Russia in her war of liberation. To this, the ambassador replied that he would assert that the Muslim East realized this, and the hour was not far off when the world would see that there was no room for European imperialism in the East. Afterwards, the ambassador stood up and with the words and said, I have the honor of presenting my sovereign's letter to the head of the Free Russian Proletarian government and the hope of the Soviet government with consideration to what the Afghan government is writing. He handed Lenin the emir's letter. Comrade Lenin answered that he accepted the letter and with great pleasure. And so this is the Soviet Union gave military support and military aid and had good relationship with the Emir of Afghanistan. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Saudi Arabia has not aligned with Russia and China. It hasn't at this point. It's playing both sides, right? It's moving to a much more independent direction. Lumpia, they have not aligned. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. It hasn't happened yet. It could happen. But right now, Saudi Arabia is still solidly in the U.S. camp. They're still solidly in the U.S. camp. They're still buying almost exclusively American weapons. They're still doing deals almost exclusively with American oil companies. There's trouble in paradise, but they have not. Saudi Arabia is not in the anti-imperialist camp at this time. Let me be clear about that. They could be forced into the anti-imperialist camp if the U.S. imperialists escalate their hostility to them, but it hasn't happened yet, Olympia. And don't confuse my words. They are not an anti-imperialist power at this time, right? And we need to be very clear about that. They are not. But if things escalate, they could be forced into the anti-imperialist camp. And if that happens, we may have to embrace them and be honest about what they are. Not pretend they're socialists, because they ain't. Not pretend that they're, some great anti-imperialist country, but recognize that they have been forced into the anti-imperialist camp and that it is our job as serious revolutionaries to have an alliance. It's not that time yet. It is not that time yet. And don't confuse my words. They are not there yet. And please don't confuse me. But there are other countries. The Emir of Afghanistan, he was forced into an anti-imperialist position, so Lenin aligned with him. But, if that had changed, if the Emir of Afghanistan had changed his mind, what's going to happen with Yemen? I don't know. Yemen is probably the main thing keeping the Saudis from jumping ship. Olympia. Let me just tell you, that's probably the main thing keeping the Saudis from jumping ship, is that they need U.S. military support and they need U.S. backing against the Houthis in Yemen. That's what they need. They desperately need that. And without that, if the USA cut off the supply of weapons, if U.S. satellites weren't providing military support, Yemen would go into the hands of the Houthis, of the Revolutionary Committee. And so that's the Houthi thing is probably the main thing that's keeping Saudi Arabia from completely cutting its ties to the United States. If Saudi Arabia completely cut its ties to the United States, I think at that point, Yemen would pretty quickly, have a full-on revolution because the Saudis wouldn't be able to fight it on their own. But we shall see. We shall see how these things develop. But that's my position on Saudi Arabia, and it's important. If Saudi Arabia is forced into the imperialist camp, we should welcome that. But it hasn't happened yet. But keep in mind that there are many countries that, for whatever reason, look, the Soviet Union made a deal with Hitler. They had to. Remember? 1939, they had no choice. The U.S. imperialists were not going to align with them to fight the Nazis. They had no choice. The Nazis were preparing an all-out invasion. And so Stalin said, all right. He said, you know what? If the U.S. imperialists and the British imperialists and the French imperialists won't form an anti-fascist bloc with us, all right, we're making a deal. And they made a deal with the Nazis. And it was the right thing to do. It was a temporary thing, and they knew it was only temporary, but it was something they had to do. And it saved millions of lives. If it hadn't been for the Pact of 39, if it hadn't been for the Pact of 39, the Second World War would have happened a lot quicker, and a lot more people in the Soviet Union would have died. But they threw a strategic curveball, and at the last minute, they said, all right, you know what? The French won't align with us. The Americans won't align with us. The British won't align with us. All right, I guess we'll make a deal with the Nazis. And it infuriated the U.S. imperialists. They threw Earl Browder, the head of the Communist Party USA, in prison. And, the British Communist Party had to dissolve. I mean, it was like they went all out. I mean, the imperialists were furious about this. But the Soviet Union said, look, we've been trying since 1935 to form an anti-fascist global front, and you won't do it with us? All right, at the last minute, we'll make a deal with Hitler. And of course, they knew Hitler was going to betray them, right? There's a whole book by Anna Louise Strong. The Soviets expected it, but they did what they had to do. Serious revolutionaries do that. And if we get to the point where Saudi Arabia is acting in an imperialist way and Saudi Arabia, is forced into the anti-imperialist camp, we'll deal with that, right? And that, look, the CPI is under attack. We are under attack, folks. I mean, I don't want to be alarmist, but you all saw what they did to me. We're under attack. Our organization is under attack. The imperialists, the FBI, the CIA, the Cult Awareness Network, they are going all in for the CPI. They don't want us to have conferences. They don't want us to platform Tara Reid. They don't want us to platform Garland Nixon. They're coming for us. And under these circumstances, we need to find friends in odd places. And I have had dialogue with some interesting people in the last couple months. And I am not ashamed of that. And if you're ashamed of that, if you want to play this cancel culture game, I am willing. There are a number of forces in the United States at this point that are under attack by the U.S. state for a wide variety of reasons. There are people on the right, there are people on the left that for whatever reason, they've been attacked by the U.S. imperialist state. And I'm willing to talk to those people, just like Earl Browder talked with Father Divine, just like the Soviet Union, had alliances with the Emir of Afghanistan. There are a number of illiberal entities. Anyone in the United States who is illiberal at this point is under attack. That's what we just have to recognize. They want to destroy all illiberalism. If you believe that truth exists, they want you gone. If they believe that right and wrong exist, they want you gone. If you believe that there's truth in life, they want you gone. If you're a leftist and you don't want to talk about, if you don't want to spend all your time talking about, how men can have babies and how every meeting starts with a pronouns, they want you gone, right? And they want to rip apart all illiberal organizations. They don't care what they're communist, fascist, socialist, Christian, Muslim, Jewish. They don't care. They want the only person with access to your brain. They want the only thing that has access to your brain to be this thing. They don't want any middleman, right? They want all of your worldview and all of your ideology and all of the way your mind works to be programmed by this thing. And if somebody is forming an organization where people study Marxism and learn how to struggle and fight back, they want it broken up. And if someone's forming a Christian organization where people study Christianity and they want it broken up. They want to destroy churches. They want to destroy mosques. They want to destroy synagogues. They want to destroy any kind of organization, any illiberalism. They want it destroyed so that they have total control of your brain. They want total thought control of the population. And any entity that is illiberal, that is telling people that right and wrong do exist, that there is a point in life, there's a reason to be hopeful, they want to tear it down. And under such circumstances, we as socialists and Marxists living in America, we're not the synthetic left. We're not woke. We are, we're what the Soviet Union was. We're what China was. We're what Cuba and Venezuela are. Because we're that, they want to destroy us. But there's a lot of other people they want to destroy. There's a lot of people they once propped up that they now wanted to destroy, like Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia is not full-on anti-imperialist yet, but they could be forced in that position. But there's a lot of other entities that they maybe propped up at one point and saw them as useful in fighting the communists. And now they target them. And we may have to enter an alliance with such folks at some time. And that's because we're serious, right? And look, let me just say this, and there's plenty more super chats to get to. So I got a lot more to say, but I just want to get this out of my system, right? If all you're doing is sitting on the internet and talking about communism, they don't give a fuck. Let me emphasize this again. If all you're doing is sitting on the internet and tweeting out Mao quotes and tweeting out pictures of yourself in a Che Guevara hat, they don't give a fuck. The internet is full of people that they don't give a shit about. The internet is full of teenagers who 1 week they're a Trotskyist, and the next week they're a Maoist, and the next week they're a follower of Enver Hoxha, and the next week they're an anarchist, and they don't give a fuck about any of those people. And if you do that, they're not going to come after you. They're not going to silence you. They don't give a fuck because it doesn't matter. None of that matters. What matters is when you form a community. It's when it stops being an online commodified identity, stops being a costume you put on to have fun and make TikTok videos. When you actually build a community of people and you actually start having events and conferences, and you actually start having workshops, and people start being able to depend on each other, and that's where they get scared. And when that happens, they will do anything in their power to break it up. They will. They do not want that to happen. They do not want real organizing to happen. That's what they don't want. And if you want to just be an internet communist and you just want to sit around, LARPing, be my guest. You can do that. But don't pretend that you're doing what needs to be done, because you ain't. And then don't think that somehow you're superior to people who actually do stuff. Whenever you do anything in real life, they immediately make fun of it. Oh my God, that's cringe. What nerds? They're doing stuff. Oh my God, this is cringe. It gives me church camp vibe. It's like, ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. You are correct, Lori. And they don't care. They do not care. If you just want to be a teenage communist on the internet, no one cares about that. What they care about is when you actually start to get things done. And you'll notice that there's a lot of communist groups they tolerated for a long time. The Workers' World Party, I was in it for 8 years. They tolerated them for a long time. They were not a threat to anything. But they broke them up. The deep state broke them up. It was amazing, and thank God I was out. They handled it amazingly badly, but I was out of the group. I was out of the group in 2015, and then 2016, 2017, my phone was ringing and people from different states were calling me crying. They couldn't believe it. People were smashing up offices with baseball bats. Members' home addresses were being leaked on the internet. And they did the same thing, sexual assault, drama, I don't even know what the allegations were. No one could ever give me a straight story about what the allegations were, right? It was that somebody in some branch of the group did something. Well, if somebody did something, if someone sexually assaults somebody, you kick them out, sure. If somebody, sexual assault is sexual assault. I don't even know what happened. But it became so much bigger than whatever happened. And people got hurt, and the group fell apart. And internet drama was the group was destroyed. And I look back on that now and I'm just like, well, geez, on the one hand, I'm thankful that I got out, that I wasn't involved when that happened, right? It was bad when I was in it. There was a lot of things that were regrettable, but nothing like that was happening. Nothing like that was happening. It was bad, but nothing like that was happening. You look at all the groups this is happening to now. Freedom Road, PSL, all of them, there's some sex drama or something, and then they collapse. All these groups that they tolerated for years, they collapse. And I've noticed one thing that all of them have in common is that they went along with wokeness. Wokeness is it's like drinking bleach. It just poisons you. It kills you. Right? And that's what wokeness, that's what happened. These groups went along with the wokeness, and then somebody accused somebody, and then pretty soon the group fell apart. The Workers' World Party, at this point, CPI has more members than Workers' World Party does. You know that? Workers' World Party has been around for 60 years, but CPI has more members, right? And we dissolved in August, and we just reformed. We still have more members than they do. All right. After a month after we reconstituted after dissolving, we still have more members than they do. And that shows you that's what happens. If you pander to wokeness will destroy you. Why is CPI still here? We got hit. They hit us. Why are we still here? Because we don't play ball with wokeness. And I'll just tell you, a lot of these organizations, they tolerated them. And then they just got to the point, it's like, we don't really want any illiberal organization. Groups that believe in communism, even if they're playing ball with wokeness, we're going to destroy them. And one by one, they just destroyed all of these groups. All the groups are dying. All the groups are dying. One by one, they're all falling apart. because wokeness and toxicity and COINTELPRO is just coming in, and somebody gets mad at somebody and on the internet, and so just keep that in mind, right? That we're doing real work and building a real organization, and that's much more dangerous. It's much more dangerous building a real organization, and they have broken apart all the old organizations, and we're just going to keep going. We are just going to keep going. All right. And I'll tell you another thing. The only thing that is keeping CPUSA from collapsing is us, me and Haas. If CPUSA didn't have Haas and me to kick around, Taryn would just tear the group apart. All right. But right now, she's tearing the group apart. She's driving out everyone in the group she doesn't like on the grounds they're secretly working for me or they're secretly working for Haas, which they're not. Well, maybe they're working for Haas. I don't know what Haas is doing, but they're not working for me. So, but eventually I'm going to be out of the picture. They're not going to be able to do that anymore, right? To claim that there's underground agents. And eventually they're just going to self-destruct, which is what they do, Oh, it is self-destructing. Okay, well, there you go. It's just, this is how organizations work. Wokeness destroys you. There is no compromise with wokeness. CPI is existing because we're not woke, and we are under attack. And we will continue to be under attack. And because we're under attack, we're going to enter alliances with other forces that are under attack. We're going to recognize those forces have differences with us. We're going to recognize that, right? We will align with other forces that are under attack. And I just want to get that off my chest. But anyway, that was a long thing. And we got many more super chats to go through. Next book, good books on Venezuelan socialism. All right. We Created Chavez by it's called by Chigarello Mar. What's his first name? It's called We Created Chavez. That's a very good book. By George Chigarello Mar. We Created Chavez. I recommend that book. We Created Chavez. That's pretty good. I'm trying to think what other books on Venezuelan socialism are there. The theoretician of Bolivarian socialism, she was one of the main ideologues, is Marta Harnacker. I don't know if people know who that is. Marta Harnacker. She was a Chilean Marxist-Leninist, and she was one of the main thinkers of 21st century socialism. So if you want to know what they think, Marta Harnacker, that's 21st century socialism. She was in the Salvador Allende government. She's lived in Cuba for a while, and she died. But she wrote a number of books, some of which have been published in English, that it kind of explain the Bolivarian perspective. She was one of the main advisors to the socialist government of Venezuela. I would recommend her as well. Marta Harnacker. She was one of the main, Marxist theoreticians of Bolivarian socialism. All right. Rojava in Syria, is it socialist? No. Rojava is just, it's been carved out. It's the Kurdish separatist forces. It's the area that they control. And they espouse this weird anarcho-syndicalist ideology, Murray Bookchin or whatever, but they're Kurdish nationalists, right? And I guess, they're fighting for Kurdistan. You know what I mean? And yeah, there's probably cooperatives there and workers' democracy or something, but socialism is a centrally planned economy. And that in Syria right now, the country's in utter chaos and civil war. And there's no socialism there right now. Obviously, Syria before the civil war, you had Ba'athist Arab socialism. You had a planned economy with a centrally planned government. Now the country's in chaos. Rojava is a Kurdish nationalist area that they've carved out, and there's some worker co-op stuff going on there. But the country's in civil war and it's in ruin. That's what I would call it. So there you go. Imperialists ruined the term woke. Should we use it? Yeah, because that's what people know we're referring to. That's how people know what we're talking about. When we say woke, people know what we mean. It means this fake leftism that has taken over U.S. society. And that's what we're talking about. So there you go. Why do you support the Islamic Republic? Shouldn't we support the current rebellion? Because the Islamic Republic is the main stronghold of anti-imperialism in the Middle East. And it's not a capitalist society. It's not capitalism, but Islam. They have a planned economy. They have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They've got the Basij councils. And, their perspective is not mine, and they do need to reform in areas like women's rights. There's a lot of areas where they do need to reform, but the current rebellion is being fomented by the United States for the purpose of overthrowing the Islamic Republic and bringing in neoliberalism. And the Islamic Republic is a good friend of Venezuela, and it's a good friend of Russia and China, and it has raised millions of people out of poverty, and it has a very much a planned economy, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is the biggest economic entity in Iran. Iran is a stronghold of resistance to Western imperialism and Zionism, and the current rebellion, yes, there are issues in Iran, but the USA is trying to manipulate the current rebellion so they can overthrow the Islamic Republic. That's what's going on there. All right. Stalinist top-down revolutions. What does that mean? Right? Are they referring to countries where there was like a section of the military that took power, and so it's a top-down revolution? Well, there were places, Cuba is a great example, where sections of the military and sections of the state took power and aligned with the Soviet Union. But then you'll notice that they did things to change the nature of the economy. Libya, for example, they created the People's Assemblies and the People's Assemblies and the revolutionary committees, right? In Cuba, they created the committees to defend the revolution, and that, maybe the revolution starts out from the top, but then they immediately begin mobilizing the public to defend the revolution, creating entities of people's power. So it's not, any revolution, every revolution has involved people that are part of the old regime breaking away and joining the revolution. And that happens. And if you're serious about any revolution, you should want that, right? Was Fidel, Gaddafi was in the military of Libya before the revolution. Should he have not joined it? Should the military of Libya not have joined the revolution? The fact that Gaddafi, a leader of the Libyan military, joined the revolution, he joined with the oil workers and the other forces and overthrowing the king and establishing socialism, that was a great step forward. So there you go. And then, yes, in order to fully have socialism, you can't just nationalize industries. You have to mobilize the public. You have to create workers' councils, etc. And they do that, right? These, quote unquote, top-down regimes, even in Ethiopia, the Derg, right? It was a section of the military that was pro-Soviet. They took power, but then they created workers' committees, revolutionary committees that enforced the will of the Derg on the local level. That in order to stay in power, if the country's actually going to move towards socialism, there's actually been a change in class forces. They have to mobilize the public to defend the revolution. All right. Nuclear fusion breakthroughs in Lawrence Labs. Look, I'm optimistic about it. I'm very optimistic about it. And I hope that this leads to a higher energy source, but we shall just have to see. I've heard a lot of optimistic news about fusion energy, but it doesn't fully break through, right? And I hope that this time this will mean that we're actually going to go full speed ahead into fusion energy. But it hasn't happened yet. And China with their artificial sun, they've had amazing breakthroughs. Thank you, Lionel. They've done amazing things, and there have been breakthroughs in Iranian labs before. And this new breakthrough is a great development, and I support it. But hopefully it leads to a concrete change in the global energy system. So there you go. Bernie Sanders just voted against the Yemen resolution. What's wrong with Bernie's brain? Look, he's been, he voted for the bombing of Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia, 1999. He supported Bill Clinton's attack on Serbia. And Bernie Sanders is not good on foreign policy stuff. For a while, it seemed like the liberals were doing their thing against the Saudis, but it seems like now, again, the Saudis want the one thing keeping them solidly in the imperialist camp is Yemen, I think. So there you go. All right. What's going on with Elon Musk? Look, there's a big section of U.S. society that's angry about the wokeness. The midterms are over. And so now we can get some acknowledgement about Twitter's manipulation of the political process. We can get some acknowledgement about what's been done to Trump. This is part of the fact that, that they try to keep the country together. People that are alienated from the political process need to feel like they have representation. That's important, right? If all the Trump people all quit Twitter and went on Truth Social, they'd have a problem now, wouldn't they? Right? If all of the mainstream, if all the people that were sympathetic to Trump stopped watching mainstream media, they'd have a problem. But in order to let people that are alienated from the system get back in and continue to be, under their influence to some degree or other, you have to give a little representation to dissidents. And so acknowledging that Twitter meddled in the elections, that's important. I think it's important for bringing, making sure that conservatives stay on Twitter. right? And it's important for making, bringing the MAGA current back into the mainstream political process. They don't want those people to just be alienated and set up their own, alternate, sphere of influence in American politics. They want them to be watching Fox. They want them to be on Twitter. They want them to be on Facebook. So giving some acknowledgement to what we all knew was going on needs to be done. So there you go. How should I already answered the Saudi question. So there we go. All right, everybody. I answered the super chat questions. It's been fun. I won't be on tomorrow night, I don't think, but I will be back on Thursday night. I'll be back on Thursday. So it's been fun. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, the people of all countries must get prepared. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody.